Good morning, everyone. We are here. Just look at this quickly. Hi, Jordan. How are you
Morning.
doing?
Good. How about you?
Good. Uh,
I didn't send you pictures yesterday because there was weather and I didn't go. So
you didn't go where?
over to the table. You sent me pictures of Annapolis, the tents.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm just looking for something that I am wondering if it came off my cell phone. I guess it did. I guess it didn't make it. Hmm. Okay. Um, where are we? Okay. So, what I would like to do today is um, talk about a discussion that I've been having internally with Tim, my wife, and to a lesser extent. Good morning, Art. Nice to see you. I hope you'll like this today. Um, about uh, it crosses over the issue of AI rationalism and irrationalism. And so I guess I have it on my phone. I must have it on my phone. Um, this discussion that came through from between me and my wife yesterday. Um, and so I'll read it because it's an AI discussion. And so anyway, how have you been? Meanwhile, Jordan, before we get into the
Oh, fine. Yeah,
nuts and bolts of this, you,
fine. Just normal life stuff.
yeah. Did you ever run into John Nichols in Taos, the
Not that
guy
I'm.
who wrote a novel called the Milagro Beanfield War, among other things.
No, I don't think I have. That name sounds so familiar.
Well, he went to my college. He also wrote The Sterile Cuckoo, and he wrote The Graduate,
Oh, okay.
right?
That's why it sounds familiar.
Yeah. I think he wrote The Graduate. I know he wrote the Sterile Cuckoo, and I thought he was involved in The Graduate, and he anyway wrote the Milagro Beanfield War, which is very famous in Taos. So uh,
Yeah.
a lot of locals will know what that is. Good morning, Kathy. Nice to see you today. Um, and so anyway, we've been talking about the discussion between rationality, which is railroad tracks, which is every book you ever read is somebody laying down tracks and trying to have your mind follow along with them, right? Every book that's ever written is like that. And most paintings are like that also, especially if um, if the painting has actual images in it, um, then uh, then it definitely is rational. That's rational. Because once you put something out there, it already becomes rational.
Mhm.
And the only thing that isn't uh, rational is abstract painting, right? Because it doesn't try to have a picture of anything. And So anyway, let me just see how we're doing with YouTube. Okay, looks like we're all right, although I hope we're not as blurry as that. Uh, Actually, we're not actually blurry. Um, but in any case, so I've been having this discussion and about the role of AI and so on. And so I did uh, on Saturday, I did this painting, which I'm going to share with you very quickly. And you and everyone has seen my Rocky paintings, but this is a completely different style. And so there you go. And this is called Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. Okay, the name of this
Title.
painting. Pardon?
Good title.
Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. And so what you see is, anything that's on the earth, if we think in terms of, well, let me explain what happened with my discussion with my wife about AI here, because she kept wanting me to try to use AI uh, with her with some of my art issues. So I said, well, okay, give this is uh, it's called Microsoft Copilot that she uses. Okay. And it's an AI she uses. And so I said, well, give it this painting. And the only prompt I want you to give it is extrapolate. Okay. Extrapolate. Please extrapolate. And I gave her the name and the prompt, which is extrapolate. Uh, does that prompt mean anything to you, Jordan or Emma? Mela?
Well, there would be you're implying for me to deduce, to unpack, to in some way express more than what is seen.
Right. Okay. So I would be a little more expansive than this and say, given this painting, what does the rest of the universe look like? Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that's, and I wanted to give the AI open field running. The AI could tell me anything that it wanted to about this painting. And by the way, this painting is based on a, a a prompt. What would I say about it? It's based on a art prompt that I got from Penelope Ryder. Okay, so had um, Penelope had said this is how she's doing her paintings now, and she said she's taking tubes of paint, and she only had 4 tubes there, and then she's just getting the paper totally wet and seeing what happens. So I have a koi set of watercolors that has 16 colors in it. So I put dots of paint. This is what she does. She puts dots of paint on the paper. And so you can see the bright orange yellow one in the middle, for example. You can see that that's still a blob of watercolor paint, right? And so this is what emerged, right? And and hello, how are you, Brian? Nice to see you. We're talking about irrationality and rationality. So anyway, I'd done this painting, and Debbie was sharing this painting with Tim Holmes, and uh, and she said, she wanted to get the painting or the chatbot to do something with it. And so Debbie couldn't get her mind around the prompt extrapolate. So I said, well, ask her, what do you infer from this painting? Okay, that's the question. That's what extrapolate really means in this case. And so let me see here. Where is it? So I said, what do you infer from this painting? And what I had said to her was tracks to nowhere through magnificence. AI can only deal with the rationalism implied by the tracks. And so then she had this conversation with the AI, and this is what it said. Question, Skip had me ask Copilot, she's explaining it to Tim, my husband sent by you, and then here's what Copilot said. My husband, or what she said, my husband painted this. It's called Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. He wants to know what you can infer from it. And here's the answer from the AI. Your husband's painting, Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence, is quite captivating. The bright yellow circle at the center, surrounded by dynamic streaks of red, blue, green, and black, creates a sense of movement and energy. The lines that radiate outward resemble tracks or paths, but they don't lead to any specific destination, which aligns beautifully with the title. From this, one might infer that the painting explores themes of journey and direction without a clear endpoint. It suggests that while there may not be a defined destination, there is beauty and magnificence in the journey itself. The vibrant colors against the soft background could symbolize moments of clarity or significance amidst life's uncertainties. It's a thought-provoking piece that invites viewers to reflect on their own paths and the beauty found in the process, rather than just the destination. What inspired him to create this piece? And so I answered, the work of Penelope Ryder, to which Copilot replied, that's fascinating. Penelope Ryder's work must have a profound impact on his artistic vision. While I couldn't find specific details about Penelope Ryder's artwork, I guess, because it's not on the internet, it's clear that her influence has inspired a beautiful and thought-provoking piece in Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. It's always intriguing to see how different artists inspire each other and how those influences manifest in unique ways. Does he have any other favorite artists or styles that inspire his work? So Deb answered, she answered for Skip and said, Tim and Colleen. It came back with Tim Holmes and Colleen Kibert are both remarkable artists with unique styles and profound impacts on the art world. Tim Holmes is known for his sculptures and paintings that often explore themes of human experience and transformation. His works have been exhibited globally, including a solo exhibit at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. Then it gives the link to Tim's site. Holmes's art often reflects primarily with clay and bronze, Her art is deeply influenced by her studies in psychology and Asian philosophy, which she integrates into her creative process. Kiber's sculptures often seek to uncover personal and spiritual meaning, making her work both introspective and expressive. It's wonderful to see how your husband draws inspiration from such diverse and profound sources. Does he have any specific pieces by these artists that he particularly admires? And then Deb says, and then she ended the conversation. So, do you have any comments on this AI reaction to this piece? I have a few, but I'll save them until you.
Well, even using GPT and such, I feel it makes a simple and clear language, for one. And then, but for two, it feels like the intern at the New York Times Art Review critic lab. And that it didn't tell me anything that you didn't already know. It just went and did all the busy work. And yeah, cool. Here's the thing: if someone else knows Colleen and Tim, I'm like, oh, cool. But chat just gleaned for similarity on the internet and overlaid a little bit of contrast and made sure there was an upbeat tone. And the thing is, I think that's fine from a person, but with the chat GTP, it feels a little pandering. And I'm kind of mixed because I know Facebook uploaded like, I think it was 36 million pages of history and sociology to an AI software, and within 24 hours, it was spitting out misinformation.
Mhm.
And so what happened is it was using that information, but then gleaning the calculus of lies on the internet, which honestly, I think if I simplify all of what I just said, there's this kind of appearance versus reality concept it's prevalent in modern literature. The irony of say one thing and mean another, which is extrapolate. And so I do though find it's interesting that that Copilot did have somewhat of a personal tone of the upbeat quality. Oh, it's interesting that pulls from such diverse sources, and it's curious, that okay, that it makes a determination or a discernment of difference, i.e., diverse. So it's colorful language, but it's colorful language, but honestly, it rings flat because it felt like, what did you do this summer? Sixth grade, 2-paragraph book report.
Right.
And I don't, and nothing against your work at all, but
No, I know.
but I think really, if I drill down, the bothersome part of it to me is it makes other people be able to be more lazy than they already were. And
Right.
I a friend of mine suggested, with all the different writing projects I have, that I just won't finish because I'm kind of tired of them because they're too intellectual. I said, well, plug them into Chat GPT and let them. And initially, it was kind of intriguing, but then I thought, well, but what about the fact that I don't want to do them anymore? So why would I want to complete something? Who was I trying to impress? So I think ChatGPT gives an example. Honestly, it's like Pablo Neruda's poetry.
Let's correct. It's Copilot. It's Microsoft Copilot that she was using.
Microsoft Copilot. And
Hmm.
it's kind of like Pablo Neruda's poetry. I want to like it a lot more than I actually do.
Hmm.
It's like Aunt Jemima syrup poured into syrup on syrup in a bowl of syrup, and where are my waffles? You know, so I'm getting seduced by this cobra language, this kind of hypnotizing and so allegedly factual, except it's literally a mirror. It's
Yeah.
just spitting back obvious.
Yeah.
And
It's sort of
so
it's sort of like it's like the definition of a consultant. It borrows your watch to tell you what time it is.
exactly, because it's only or simply um, it's sounding really clear. Except the thing is, it's not extrapolating; it's regurgitating.
Yeah, yeah. And so my response to this was my response is that AI is an interesting and useful tool, though its ability to infer more profoundly extrapolate is limited to the four corners of the internet. I'm glad it is because what would artists do otherwise? It couldn't find Penelope's work on a website, so it couldn't comment except in very general terms. That can be useful at the right moment. Okay, so in other words,
That's
uh,
yeah, we're saying
our
this. We're saying the same thing. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
So that's how I reacted to that too. It just sounded like a sort of regurgitated art criticism, right? And so I didn't do this for that purpose at all, or for art per se. I mean, in the same sense that Jung didn't do things for art as art per se. I did this as an illustration of the idea that when you put down tracks, okay, when you do something rational, whether it's a philosophy or a religion or what have you, you're helping people understand things. You're bringing people along. You're bringing the human species along because we have, I don't know how many people are born every day, a couple 100,000 maybe, and they all need to learn, right? But in the end, everything that's already manifest, including this discussion, right? Everything that's already manifest is like railroad tracks. And so the discussion can go on ad infinitum from this discussion here and never end. And my point was if you're given only this painting, what else is in the universe? Extrapolate what else is in the universe. And chat or Copilot doesn't know because it's limited to everything that's on the internet. It can't get anything else.
well, you just gave me. I think if I can kind of boil down everything I said into what I really felt like I was listening to from that response, Copilot's response was a people pleasing yes person who is nauseating, frankly,
Yeah,
and and the reality of that was that to extrapolate implies verbs like to challenge, and
right.
and the thing is, it just skimmed the surface. It never challenged. It never dropped in. So it felt like and go figure, Brian just popped back on. It feels like a surgeon that did the surgery by just walking into the OR and talking about it and never pulled out a scalpel. I mean, so it's a lot of talk, except it's a lot of wasted air. And I think it's simple. It skims the surface and never drops in
Yeah.
because to
But
Last
extrapolate
week,
to go in.
last week I was watching the movie American Psycho.
oh,
Because
yes.
there are so many American Psycho memes on the internet right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, "Oh, let me watch the movie. It's free and whatever." So I was watching the movie on cable, and I think that's exactly how robots are. Robots are just, if we arm them, they'll probably annihilate all of humanity right away because that response was very like, gee, I don't really know the answer to your question. It was very predatorial. So then it went into your algorithm. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Assessed your history of like what you're interested in, what you've been talking about, what you've searched, what you've saved, everything inside of your hard drive, and basically said, okay, well, now I've calculated exactly what kind of a person you are, and here's my sociopathic, psychopathic response to you. And so now here's your empty, emotionless, concrete, rational response to, you know, what you're asking me. And it's very like going into some kind of restaurant in Beetlejuice's underworld
Yeah.
and saying like, can I get some cappuccino? And they make you like the most stalest, blandest, cheapest cappuccino you'll ever have. And it's like, well, you ordered a cappuccino, you get what you pay for, you know. So that's the kind of
Yeah.
perception I'm having on this, you know, on this experience that you've had with artificial intelligence and analyzing your work and the questions that you're asking. It's sort of like an evil Ouija board.
That's
Yeah.
funny you say that. It's like, you know, it's that someone cutting their tomatoes on this wood Ouija board, and it's like, oh my Lord, my chicken keeps coming back alive. What's going on? And
Oh, that's
here,
creepy.
yeah, there, I feel like with the AI here, there's the seduction of rephrased clarity. I mean, in psychology, there's the match and mirror quality. The problem is that's again not extrapolating. It's not asking questions, and questions imply curiosity and interest. And match and mirror is just pandering. So it's like a giant paragraph-sized thesaurus. It's
Mhm.
just coming back with the same thing in different words, but not necessarily differently. So, you know, I don't want someone to be a mirror all the time. I mean, the third person perspective is cool, but there's a point of what did they get from what I said? What did I get from what they said? Do I get silence and steeping in something? You know, that's the inaction verbally, but that's active internally. And I think, how does the curiosity and wonderment function? And with your directive of extrapolate or to extrapolate, it doesn't function. It didn't function at all. It journeyed, except it journeyed in a horizontal. It did
Mhm.
not go deep or high.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not necessarily the color of my parachute, but maybe someone who's like a software engineer, they might think like, okay, well, you know, this artificial intelligence robot that's in my system is sort of like my personal secretary, and she's basically reviewing everything that I've been ignoring in my hard drive for like 30 years. So now it's all popping up, it's all coming back to me now. I didn't realize that you know, I was reading this article or looking up this program and all that other engineering, computer engineering or software engineering stuff. So I guess it really depends on the personality type and the career type mostly, because for myself, I wouldn't really be able to rely on this dry, kind of empty, obstructive.
well,
uh,
that's a good point, because I know several colleagues that will use their Copilot or their Chat GPT to retool their website verbiage. So it's speaking at an eighth grade level, and everyone can understand it, and it's crystal clear. But it's so clear, it's often boring. Except website verbiage is, you know, it could be engaging, but it's not going to be, you know, out there literature. So there's a point of protocol, I think, where its use is to polish clarity. But the thing is, then it's not like a brass door handle that's all dark brown and black where you haven't touched it, and shiny gold where it's used. And I think that's where I kind of stray from any interest in it, is that it still doesn't have a quality of use. It doesn't have the dirt. It doesn't have the mud pie that made my immune system good. And in that sense, the ability to challenge external forces that come in and engage with them and extrapolate together. It is dry. It's pretty dry, but it's honestly, it's too pretty. It's the peacock that never puts the feathers down. And I'm like, well, what does it really look like when it's not all aroused and, threatened, or, enticed, or interested? And
Right.
the
Okay.
lifestyle.
So I wanted this for one very simple reason, and that is I wanted this as an illustration of the idea of when you put anything out there, when you put railroad tracks across a desert, wherever they are, you got the railroad tracks, but you don't necessarily have the rest of the scene, right?
Or a
And
train.
or a train, yeah. And so yeah, a book, for example, is filled with railroad tracks we call letters or sentences or paragraphs, what have you. But as long as it's sitting on the shelf in the library, it's nothing, right? And there's a whole lot else that goes on in the world besides that. And if we polled everybody that's on YouTube at the moment and our group, each one of us would have a different thing to say about what's behind the railroad tracks. That's my point. And this is the fundamental point of Jungian psychology. I'm going to circle back to that, which is, an analyst or a psychotherapist can only give you so much, and think of it as one of these lines on this painting. But, you have a lot more stuff in your brain, both beautiful and not beautiful, in your brain. And you don't necessarily share everything that you might ought to share with your therapist anyway. And so, the whole idea of Jungian psychology is to open access to what is unconscious, all this other stuff that's in the painting that isn't railroad tracks, all this other stuff that's in your mind but isn't what you're talking to your psychologist about or your analyst about. That's the idea, and it's such an important point. I mean, I think of it as kind of the most important issue that applies to all religions and all art, everything, really, everything in our life. We have to understand that there's a lot more to it than what we see.
If I back up, then me saying, or a train, that was a very boring AI thing to say. I need to cross-check myself, because that wasn't creative. I should have said, or it would have been better to say something, a kid with a penny. They're going to put it on the track. Does it derail the train? Does it flatten the penny? Does it kick the penny off? Hopefully the kid doesn't get shot with a penny like a bullet. I mean, there's a whole lot of that would be creative. And psychologically, it reminds me of those therapists who do not know how to cut the cords of the past, and people's problems get worse because they're ruminating. And just like a garden, if you water your garden and weed your garden, the garden grows. And if you pay attention to your problems, you give them energy and they grow.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of look at you in situ, in that chair or couch with the therapist, and in context. How do you feel? What age do you feel? But not going back there. Let them come here, because there's a non-rumination piece that's then you're living. And I think the big point of therapy is like Jung, I don't want clients for life. I want to teach them how to live their own. He didn't want little children and never leave the nest. You know, he's enacting the Oedipus ritual of leave the nest.
Mhm.
And I think that AI sticks around the area of rumination. It can only deal with what has come before, which deadens what is to come from things. And I think the simple definition of symbols are generative. AI is not generative, it's just formative. It's just
Mhm.
putting things together from things that have already come, not the seed sprouts.
Right. So unfortunately, I mean, I think it would have broken a supercomputer to actually answer what I wanted it to answer. Okay, which was, if this is the world, what does the whole universe look like? Okay, and it could be computing that that question forever because it couldn't get to the end. Okay, the universe is infinite, and even if you said that you're only going to talk about the universe as implied by this painting, um, the no computer could ever get to the end of it,
Well,
right?
you just reminded me, um, a graduate philosophy class I took my freshman year in college was, I think, the image and reality of man and the machine in modern literature. And one of the, a lot of using Turing's machine model and a lot of not using Turing's machine model and a lot of other things. But it was 12 people, mostly graduate students in physics and mathematics and philosophy. And then, me, this, what's the freshman architecture student doing here? But there was this one cartoon that came up because the primary priority we had was really, what is consciousness? How do we know that something is sentient and able to form thoughts from nothing, not just spit them back? If then, if P, then Q, if and only if A. I mean, just simple philosophy of logic. So get past the geometry proofs of consciousness and get into what it actually is. It. And I remember the professor brought in this cartoon, and it pretty much said it all. Like you said, not getting to the end. And it was these um, two philosophers in white lab coats in the copy room. They're poring on the table over these documents. How will we know when this code is conscious? How will we know? What is our discernment point for, oh,
Or maybe
okay,
we'll never know because it will have killed us before we figure it out.
well, yeah, that, and they kept doing this, and it was it's like 6 frames, and all. How will we know? How will we know? What model will we use to discern that we actually know? I mean, so that they turn back in on themselves, and then the last frame was the copier behind them, and it leaned back on the two back casters, and it says, "That reminds me of a story." And so there's your never ending, once upon a time, fill in the blank, the end. Well, there's the consciousness of, tell me the
Right.
story.
Uh, yeah. Okay. So anyway, I hope we didn't bore you with this, but it is an important Jungian point that I wanted to make here. And it relates to what's happening to Jung in this essay that Paul Bishop wrote, where he's talking about the Red Book, and he's talking about 3 characters in the Red Book. He's talking about Elijah, uh, Izdubar, and Philemon. And we have to remember that in the Red Book, um, Jung is only going through this for the first time. I mean, it's like he has a lot of experience, maybe 10 years experience as a maid psychiatrist, but he's just discovering this technique of active imagination and how you can use this technique to get to have conversations with different parts of yourself. And we talk about people who can hear voices. Well, yeah, those voices are actually there. Those voices are parts of yourself. Now, most of us, in our conscious mind, I guess we interpret those voices as not significant. But it seems to me that the rest of Jung's life is devoted to showing that those voices are significant. And so here in the Red Book, which is back in 1913, 1914, about 45 years before, 47 years before Jung's death, he's only encountering it for the first time, and he's encountering collective unconscious because he's having all these prefiguration dreams and visions about World War I, and he's trying to understand what all these things mean, and he's spent 10 years with people who actually are quite mentally ill at the Bergolsli, but maybe those people weren't so ill after all, because maybe if those people were given the prompt, an explanation about AI, and the prompt to keep a journal of your AI, maybe they would work out what's going on in their conflicted self, in their psyche, which is what neurosis is about. Neurosis is two parts of yourself fighting with one another, and there's no cure to it, but you can draw a fence in your psyche. You can imagine a fence being drawn around that argument and put it over in the corner and let those two parts of yourself duke it out. But every time one of the issues comes up, you can say, oh yeah, I remember over in that part of my mind, I was having this debate with myself.
Well, and that brings up the personal extrapolation of neuroses, where they're often just rocks in the river we cling to. And I don't know if it's Freud or Jung who said, you can get a person to change unless you go after their neuroses, which they will cling to and kick and scream and fight to keep to the death. And it's those points of safety. And I think they're the external parents of, your parents are no longer gods. Your context is larger. God is infinite. You can't transcend it anymore. And so you're trying to then turn inward to hold on to some specific things that give you solace, peace, comfort, safety, terror,
Yeah, or maybe they make you neurotic because you can't deal with them, right?
Right. And so you're basically a pinball bouncing around between the neuroses of points giving, bing, 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 and then you take someone who's institutionalized, and maybe they're the pachinko balls. There's so many they don't realize to pull out to the observer, see what's going on, and then add to that. Dr. Georgia Ede at Harvard has recently teamed up with another psychiatrist, she's one as well, and put people on a keto or high animal fat protein carnivore diet. And within 2 weeks, almost every schizophrenic, some who have been that for 25, 30 years, were starting to become normal functioning human beings, indicating that it was a type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, brain fog kind of condition that had to do with nutrition. And with all of our seed oils and oxidized this, that, and the other ultra processed stuff, the food was about addiction and not nutrition. And when she got people back to, an ancient diet, as it were, their brains started to clean up. And that makes sense because the brain is what, 70% cholesterol? It's fat.
Yeah.
So I think
Um,
that comes back to AI with how do we transcend or how do we extrapolate? I'm really liking that word because it's simple enough, but it also is the manhole cover that needs to be lifted. How do we go inside and extrapolate? And
mhm.
that means if I go outside looking for trouble in yellow cars, well, I'm going to find trouble in yellow cars. But if I go for a walk, I can extrapolate a new flower or a butterfly or meet some neighbor. And I think that to extrapolate is a really good, not oversimplified. I think it's boiling down to what's the catalyst in this crucible.
Yeah. So Cherie makes a interesting point here, and Cherie, maybe you can help me a little bit with this. She says, I saw this video yesterday with Sonu Shamdasani speaking, and it says, quote, the making of Jung's myth, uh, and it's from Archivo della Psicologia. It was amazing. So I don't know if this video is this video only in Spanish or is it in English as well? Um, and she says it's a new way of studying the history of psychotherapy with Alejandro from Alejandro from South America. Um, yeah. Okay. So anyway, going back now, just to reiterate, in the Red Book and therefore in this essay, we're talking about early in Jung's career, and it's just coming into his head some of the things that he later wrote about for the next 45 years. And that's why he says in the Red Book, you know, he didn't know how he could make people understand it because he was only getting his mind around it then. And so anyway, but so here we have three active imaginations. They are, in some way we can say they're figments of Jung's imagination, but he's keeping track of them. And so here's what he says. We'll start with Elijah. Elijah, and this is Paul Bishop's view about Elijah. In enacting Elijah, I had to, so Paul Bishop uh, worked with an ensemble in Europe, by the way, where after the Red Book was published, they went around and enacted different parts in the Red Book. And so Bishop himself is describing this experience of enacting these different characters in the Red Book. So here, and so he's talking about that he, in how he did it. He says, in enacting Elijah, I had to identify with the Old Testament prophet. I was omniscient, a semi-god who knew the secrets of the universe. I was severe and was going to tell Jung exactly what he had to do. But already in the opening of the mysterium scene, I felt incomplete. I was united with darkness, embodied in the blind Salome, as evident when I said, quote, consider this, her blindness and my sight have made us companions through eternity, unquote. These words immediately reminded me of the biblical text in the book of Proverbs 8:22 to 24. The text refers to Sophia as the eternal feminine, embodying God's wisdom that existed before creation. Quote, the Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way. Before he made anything from the beginning, I was set up from eternity before the earth was made. The depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived. With each performance as Elijah, I felt more attached to and protective of my blind daughter. Salome. I was becoming gentler and less judgmental. I was sure Salome was Jung's soul that had become blind. I had to be patient, especially when Jung continued to identify Salome with her New Testament counterpart, as when he said, quote, was she not vain, greed, and criminal lust, who shamefully shed the blood, the prophet's blood? He knew that if he could only accept the loving yet blind part of his soul, he would be ready to embrace the new message. Hence, I reminded him of this mystery, but she loved a holy man. She loved the prophet who announced the new God to the world. Eventually, I saw that the mysteries of the new God image were too much for him. He needed time to accept them. He was still too identified with the spirit of the times. He still believed he could solve everything with his intellect by reducing Elijah and Salome to some kind of intellectual symbols. Elijah, however, responded with a powerful voice. We are real, not symbols. Okay, so that's a very significant point that, Jung talks about man and his symbols, but symbols are not the real thing, right? If you have the American flag as an example, which is a symbol, you don't have America. You have a piece of cloth that's red, white, and blue, but you don't have America. It's only a symbol. And so,
Well, there would be we are real, meaning we have been born. We're not a
right,
symbol, meaning a bump in our mom's stomach. I mean,
right,
and I'm not going to go any further on that one because that's gonna open up a different kind of debate.
right,
But there's the seed is real, but is it not a tree? It's a potential tree, or it's the tree in the state of the seed. But when it cracks open, the symbol is generative. So, and in that sense, being real means we have been generated and we are also still generative.
yeah,
But the past and the future would be symbols of the present, but they are not the present.
right, right. Okay. So, so when Jordan says symbols of the past, the past is a symbol of the present, he means that everything that ever happened, going back to single cell organisms, and even before, going back to the first hydrogen atom coming out of the Big Bang, they're not described by the symbol, right?
Right. Yeah.
All that activity. Okay, so reflection. In Liber Primus, which is the red book, Jung was working through both the personal and collective dimension of his psyche. He was certainly aware of an inner connection between the blind Salome he discovered in his inner world and biblical Sophia. So I wondered what had happened to Sophia and why she had become Salome, who asked for the head of John the Baptist. Whose head was to be sacrificed? Was it Jung's head, the head that had identified with science, perhaps embodied in his admiration of Freud? Jung admits that by the time he was creating this work, he had achieved all that men could desire: fame, wealth, and knowledge. He had to go through a process of purgation and let go his devotion to the ideals of the time, his love of science, and his joy of ordering and explaining things. Some pages later in the Red Book, this sacrifice is imaged in the killing of Siegfried. the Germanic semi-divine hero. For Jung, Siegfried was, quote, my power, my boldness, my pride, unquote, and represented the belief, quote, where there is a will, there is a way, unquote. Any comment there?
Yeah, I think that's he just extrapolated past his intellect, and he actually just extrapolated past his neuroses.
Yeah.
And then the neuroses are just paints on the palette. You know, he can use them, doesn't have to use them. They're paints in the tube, maybe better. But I think he just extrapolated past the conscious to both and integrate the dance of the unconscious and the conscious, the known and the unknown, the rational and the doesn't give a rat's about rational. You know, I mean, because I think when we say irrational, that's still a rational determination of what's not making sense, whereas reasons are unreasonable. All of them would be more of the intuition speaking back to the rational. So I think he just transcended the, I love the give up, shed his ideals of the time, his love of science, and in quotes, his joy in ordering and explaining things. You know, there's OCD.
Mansplaining.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, there could be OCD there, but it's a friend of mine who has a really good, serious case of OCD, but is incredibly funny. Always says, it's not a disorder. Put it back where it belongs.
Right.
So, you know, there's the owning to neuroses that drive you that would just be synonymous with influences that aren't negative. So I think we can psychologize terms and neuroses and this and mansplaining and that. And the reality is a lot of splaining, whether it's womansplaining or mansplaining, is just the other person is tired of listening to you talk. It's their turn. Hand them to talk together, you know?
Right.
And so, but the thing is, when you make a blind overriding general gesture to everybody that, oh, well, this indicates all of you over there. Well, you're just tired of that one person, but don't put it on everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of comments here. One is Richard says, alchemy carries the curse of archetypes with it. The process of alchemy is so simple, and some people do it unintentionally, and these people are who we call schizophrenic. Yeah, I'm not sure I can unpack
I
that
don't think I
entirely.
follow that, because the schizophrenics would never pull things out of the crucible. They're just burning in the crucible. So there's an alchemy, but there's not an alchemist in that situation. So I think it starts out as a good seed of a point, but I think that the alchemist, the character, is missing. The process is very present in your statement, but
Right.
I think the actual one who's doing the alchemy, the alchemist, would be missing there.
Right, and we could say that this meeting that we do every Sunday morning is, you know, a part of an alchemical process, and we never can get to the end of it, and so all we can do is just keep talking, and hopefully the people that listen to us can be more and more informed. Okay, so
Really quickly too, I think if I pin the tail on the donkey of the schizophrenics in that situation, that statement with alchemy, maybe they are doing all of that. It's just not the way.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Maybe they are what?
Maybe they are all doing that. They're just not doing it the way we say it's done, and so we don't understand, and therefore, you know, don't judge a pig or don't judge a fish for its inability to climb a tree. You know, I mean, so don't judge a pig because it can't fly. I mean, there's a whole get out of our dogmatic ideology and actually do the kind thing. Listen, observe, don't judge, but discern. Don't be naive, but don't be brittle. And I
Right.
don't think any of us are customs agents for anyone else's personality. And as soon as, you know, I can't tell you that you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I
Right. So anyway,
like, for me, tradition is just peer pressure from dead people,
yeah.
and they don't get
So
to vote.
right. So Richard says the crucible isn't needed any longer. Our bodies are the crucible. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mhm.
Okay. Christopher Raymond
I
says,
remember. Oh,
oh, go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Emma. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was disconnected on my coffee run.
Okay.
You know, there's a psychic that I went to, and I was skeptical of going to her, but I used to pass her by every time I would go to on my way to my college campus.
Mhm.
And I looked at the sign, and it said like every other psychic's sign, past, present, future. I will solve all your problems, heal sick loved ones, da 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 da. So I was very skeptical. And then one day, a friend of mine, she tells me, "Oh, my boyfriend and I were having problems. He's a police officer. Maybe he's cheating on me. There's so many hot women out there that he could pull over and give a ticket to. I want to get a psychic reading, see if he's cheating on me." I said, okay, fine, I'll go with you. She's crying and sobbing, and oh my God.
Mm.
We go to the psychic reader, and she says, "Well, my special talent is that I have ESP and telepathy, and I can see through my crystal ball." And I was just, at the time I was just starting out with my abnormal psychology class, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, so she's hearing other people's voices? Is that schizophrenia? Like, what? Where do I bridge this conception of what's schizophrenia and what's ESP and what's telepathy and what is what and who is who and what is who?" So my mom tells me, "Don't throw diagnosis around at people." And I said, okay. So I asked my professor, she's a Scandinavian, and I figured, she'll give me a direct answer, from my bias of cultural understanding that my experience of peoples from Scandinavia is that they're very direct in
Yep.
their answers.
Hmm.
And so I asked her, I said, "Professor, I don't understand. I'm like so confused." And she said to me, "Well, a long time ago, people were sages and this and that." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." So I did some research, and it said some things like, "Oh, there's these women who have ESP, and they usually get it if someone from one of their parents or grandparents is blind." or or they get it because
Oh, yeah.
they were in some kind of strange spidey web accident, and all of a sudden they have a gift. And I said, this is just weird. How about I just, accept this lady for what she's saying, and if this is what she believes, this is what she believes. And does she have that diagnosis? I don't know. So what I did was I actually asked her. I went to her one time. I got her coffee. I got myself coffee, and she did a palm reading. Then I came to her a second time, and then a third time I came with a bottle of wine. And I said, "Okay, now I hope you don't have any kind of medical condition that I'm giving you this wine." And she says, "Well, no, I don't have a medical condition. Thank you for asking." Very confused. And I asked her, I said, "I'm studying psychology, and I have this abnormal psychology class, and they're saying that people who hear voices have schizophrenia, or, it's called psychosis." And she's like, "I don't believe in any of that. I think it's not fair. Doctors are always diagnosed."
You cut out
Yeah, you cut out Emma.
right after a doctor is always diagnosed. Well, and
Okay.
that's the thing. I think
Yeah. So let me,
until she comes back, doctor.
yeah,
Actually, I
tell
was
us
going to
when
say
you're back,
she hit it
Camilla.
because she hit it right on the head. With doctors always diagnose. It's just like that psychic.
That's
It's
how
the
they get
power of
paid.
suggestion.
Yep.
Well, it's the power of suggestion. And
Yeah.
the first day in med school, they might as well say a patient cured is a customer lost. I mean, so doctors don't know much. You know, doctors don't know a lick about nutrition. Don't ever listen to your doctor about nutrition. They've had less nutritional education than we have. And
Yeah.
so when she says doctor always diagnose, I think people are looking for so much specificity. They're not comfortable with the not knowing while daily getting their stuff done.
Yeah.
And I think the diagnosis piece is it's really important to, like her mom said, don't go around diagnosing people. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they've been through. And all I know is the most calm people I know that are truly calm, well, it's because they've been through the shit, and they came out the other side because they didn't waste trouble. They went through.
Yeah.
And you find that treasure just in not worrying about the treasure anymore. Experience life. And sometimes, oh, why is this occurring? Well, the only commonality is me. Well, why don't I drop that neurosis? Why am I so terribly terrorizing myself, holding on to something that no longer works? So molt, shed, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I think what's interesting with her and those kind of psychics, I always look at it with an eye to, are they really good? Or like an ancient Egyptian with a bicameral mind, every aspect in nature is another voice.
Yeah.
Or are they crazed by hearing voices? And in that case, is it just power of suggestion? Someone wants just to be told what to do, told and lied to that it's going to be okay. Well, it is going to be okay. The weather always washes through. It may not be fun, but so.
So Christopher says, real men don't seek warmth, fake, and knowledge. They seek peace through wisdom, which leads to justice and balance. Amen. I think that's a good way of saying it.
And I would say yes. And also, when you say real men, okay, real men at what age? Real men after they've been to war, real men before they've been to war, be it with another person in a relationship or actually another country.
Yeah.
What is the passage place of that quote unquote real man or real woman? So I have to be careful about generalizing, I think, as to that becomes judgmental again, instead of observing and believing in the magic of the experience of another person and what they're doing. I mean, solitude versus loneliness.
Right. Okay, so Cherie says, do you remember when Carl Jung visited the Pueblo Indians and what he learned when he visited them in New Mexico? Do you want to address that?
Yeah, two things. First off, he said that he was dealing with a chief, and it was actually just a lower person who happened to present himself and not say no to he was a chief. And I think he called it Blue Lake, and it was titled something else. So there was a lot of Carl Jung embellishing upon what was initially a fiction. So the story and the experience is relatively true. But what he seemed to come out with was he got tourist trapped, and someone fed him what he wanted to hear, or what he didn't know that he needed to hear. And so you have to read that story with a big grain of salt, because if you do the historical research, the person he met was not a chief. And
yeah, I think the name was Mountain Lake. Okay, the name
Mountain
of
Lake. Yeah, he called it Blue Lake or something like that. And there were a lot of he got duped, and it does not in any way demean the experience he had with that guy who was feeding him these stories, but it was just that one guy's perspective. And so, was he as wise as a chief? Wiser? Medicine woman? So I think the thing is, that story is, it's always been interesting, but I live in New Mexico. And so it was more interesting to me to, oh, cool, he was here. I want to,
Mhm.
and I started reading the story, and I'm like, I'm not going to go there. He got tourist trapped.
Yeah.
And he got tourist trapped, and he went to the basically the five and dime and got the party line from one person.
Right.
So anyway, and I don't
Well,
want
I
to
think he also did understand that the Pueblo Indians are pretty much like all of us.
well, they
Right.
are, and what's interesting too, it's I think important to state, in other states it's called the reservation, and in New Mexico it's called the pueblo,
Mhm.
which is more humanizing, and it means a place, rather than a reservation is an incarceration. And so, in a sense, is that a irony? Is it true? Is it false? But even the difference of what a Native American's home is called can call into question the politics of the area, and the prejudices of the area, as well as the inclusions and the justices of an area. Coming back to that comment about the real men piece with balance and justice.
Right.
Um,
Okay, we need to keep reading here. We're not even going to get through Elijah today, so this is entirely my fault. But anyway,
it's a journey.
it's a journey. I make no guarantees about what all we get to talk about in a day.
As long as we keep gas in the tank, and don't drive more than half a tank, and you won't run out of gas.
Yeah. Okay, so further, I was intrigued about the possible link between the patriarchal Elijah and Freud. We know that Freud was a father figure for Jung. Had Jung's psyche transformed Freud into an Old Testament prophet? Was Jung's psyche reaching into the deeper levels of the collective unconscious? Having been dismissed by father figure Freud on a personal level, Jung could approach father figure Elijah on an archetypal level. In this way, he could continue to develop psychoanalysis and apply it to the biblical God in ways entirely different from what Freud expressed in Totem and Taboo. This project eventually manifested in the transformation potential of the God image, the main theme of the much later work, Answer to Job. Do you want to address that?
I think it's wonderfully clear, but that Jung shed Freud. He left the nest, and so now he was his own father. He was his own dad, and he was the one who ruled the journey. And so Totem and Taboo, that was a lot of Freud's everything is sexualized, and look at the fetish and look at this. And I'm always thinking, well, where did he set his baseline?
Yeah.
Where did he set his baseline? I mean, I know some people who've been to war or grew up in war zones, they need a certain amount of pain to actually feel anything. They're so thick-skinned, and that's not a fetish. That's just a condition of their context. And going back to the crucible of self, where our body is the vessel. I think Jung transcended Freud, but then began to extrapolate himself in context, in situ, in the larger context even of the world, with all of his precog dreams and precognitive dreams. And then those were simply facts. Precognitive, they didn't make any sense to him until they did. But I think what happens is, go back to the Oedipal piece of leaving the nest. In that, Freud, this may also speak to people who are quote unquote psychic. His horizon got bigger. He saw further which some people would be in the future, but way out there now. So he was able to feel things incoming that he couldn't actually see, which then speaks to the soul consciousness of the blindness,
Right.
where he wasn't prone to facts, he was prone to feeling, and the ability to Sherlock Holmes deduce and extrapolate how these feelings played out in context World War One before they even did.
Okay, I'll read a bit more here, and then I'm going to need a bio break for a minute so you can cover the discussion. It also occurred to me that the blind Salome might be connected with Sabine Spielrein. If you have read Jung's few letters concerning the relationship and compare them with the many letters of Spielrein, you can only conclude that Jung was overwhelmed by the encounter. He was highly defensive, yet obviously fascinated by his young Jewish patient. Eros was constellated, and Jung could not maintain boundaries or respond to the challenge in a differentiated way. Was he in the grips of an anima who had lost her sight? It took many years before he could accept the significance of that experience, as witnessed in his later work on the psychology of the transference, the psychology of the transference, which is an essay in, I believe it's volume 11 of the collected works, but it can be found quite easily on the YouTube or on Google. Toward the end of Mysterium Encounter, Elijah reveals to Jung a new God image that will eventually bring healing to the feminine component of his psyche, a step that the agnostic Freud could not take. Jung's psyche transforms the Old Testament prophet into a prophet who is inseparably linked with the soul that has lost its way in the world. A prominent narrative in Gnosticism and Neoplatonism. In Liber Primus, the soul's redemption finds expression in the restoration of Salome's sight. For Jung, the soul, as the principal life and love, now represents a force independent of the intellect. As we read through the Red Book, this figure continues to challenge him in no uncertain ways. You want to cover that?
Yeah, I think actually that's a good place to bring Amela back in with the doctors always diagnose, where she cut out before, because I think that can speak to the transcendent or the transference piece.
Right. Amela.
If you would, Amela, I mean, you cut out before, right when you said doctors always diagnose, and then the audio and the video cut out. Can you continue from there?
Yes, I apologize. It's Sunday in Europe and everything is closed and it's illegal to work on Sundays. So if the internet crashes, good luck to me. Yeah, so and then she explained to me, her argument was, doctors are always diagnosing everything, but they never diagnose the right diagnoses because you never know when you might go to sleep and not wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, I think, yeah, I spoke after you cut out, I spoke to a similar concept there where doctors always diagnose, and some people just need something specific to hold on to. And then the doctor is, yes, but okay, that didn't work. Try this, try this. And we become these Frankenstein experiments when, if they don't know, they can say, I don't know, except the insurance company wouldn't let them say, I don't know. There has to be some insurance coding thing. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think your mom's right. The people always diagnose, and don't diagnose people. Your mom's right on the money, because we don't know what anyone else has been through or is going through. It's best to, in community and connection, listen, and listen without expectation of, oh yeah, I understand. It's maybe I don't understand, and I'm listening so I can hear their experience, and their experience can change tomorrow. You know, you're not beholden to have to stay with what someone has said. If you revise or update the expectation, then, well, you show someone how something has moved. So I really appreciate that you brought up the doctor's always diagnose, and your mom saying, basically don't do that. Because it's disrespectful to the human condition. We don't need to have a label. Just the experiential, I think, sharing is important, which I think speaks to the psychology of transference. How do we get past ourselves even and connect rather than, look through the window out at the window to the neighbor across the street and, well, I don't know, I have no idea what that person's name is.
Yes, you know, my my uncle just recently was diagnosed with cancer and it became progressive. So at phase one, the doctors didn't diagnose him with anything. And then by phase three, they were kind of skeptical on diagnosing him. So I think it's just, in terms of medicine, it's very highly political and also very biased too, and very discriminative because there's a strict model to follow, and then there's insurances and restrictions and public policies and so many different, and then the scope of practice. So it's very, very challenging. But
Well,
in terms of the human condition, I don't condone people battling a psychiatric diagnosis. Even if they're not diagnosis, it's not always good to use substances that can alter the mind. Because as an alcoholic, it's with my diagnoses, when I would have a manic episode and I would drink, it would just heighten my mania. And it wasn't until I almost got myself into some serious trouble and almost got banned from a bar that I said to myself, I really don't want to be that person that walks around my neighborhood with, that's her, that's the one who ruined everybody's night. That at that point I said, I think I'm just gonna not drink anymore because I need to be present and not altered. So that was kind of like my symbolism to her, and she really appreciated that, that I gave her this icebreaker without judging her and assuming, and that I asked her, and I appreciated her response too, because I think that's the whole thing with Jung. Even though sometimes I think like radical feminists would say, Jung, who the hell does he think he is to talk about women and their psyche and and their psychic abilities? That man is sexist and fetishizes his patients. So I just it's a whole aisle of can of worms.
It is a whole aisle of can of worms, and actually toxic masculinity was created by radicalized femininity. And the reality is, the whole equality thing, if I was a woman, I probably wouldn't want to go throw chains around pipes on an oil rig. I don't know. So I think the equality thing is out of hand because we're born equal. We're not born equal. I think we're born equally valuable, and we each have roles and responsibilities that we decide. There's nothing that gets put on you like you're stamped out of a Play-Doh fun factory, and then you, as a man or a woman or anywhere in between, you have to do something. I think there is, what is the balance and justice of your personal resonance? And that's important because then, oh, so and so, you can't say, well, they already said it, so what do you mean you can't? And you have to look at things in context with even Jung's languaging and actions were kind of culturally, unfortunately, appropriate to the time. And in that sense, if you can understand history through the eyes of the time, you don't judge based on now where things
Yeah.
have changed and are simply different. And then in the Renaissance, maybe they were more like now. Um,
Yeah,
or
there's no question that Jung was a male chauvinist pig. No
yeah,
question at
that's
all.
none at all. And
Right.
he's
And
a matter.
at that stage, at the time that he was dealing with Sabina Spielrein, there were no guidelines for um, for analysts or therapists about what could and could not be done. And he and many others had to start putting those rules in place.
Well, yeah,
Oh,
he's the classic example of, oh, you're going to meet your mate at work. It's like,
yeah, right. And he just he wanted to live without too many rules. Okay, that was his
yeah,
answer. And understood that's the way he was. And I never say, and I don't want anybody to think that I think that Jung was a god man or anything like that. But what he has done for me is he's served as my shrink over a period of now nearly 35 years or 35 years plus. And so was he a perfect man? No, he wasn't. Did he influence the cultural revolution of the 1960s? Yes, he did. And that's very clear on the cover of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band from the Beatles, right? He was a lonely heart, but he um, was a precursor to actual feminism, I think. And
he included women in his practice and
right, right, and
professionally. I mean,
right,
I want
and
to
and most
clarify.
most of the people who were involved in actually founding the Jung Institute in Zurich and the Jung Institute in New York were actually women. And even in here in Washington, the Jung Society of Washington is essentially run by women. There's only two analysts that deal with men in the Washington area. All the rest are women. Um,
It's a Minoan society.
right.
It's a
And
matriarchy, is what I'm trying to say.
well, it is a matriarchy. Surely it's a matriarchy. And that's what's very interesting about this now presidential campaign that we have going, because uh, one side is definitely stuck in the patriarchy, and the other side is has, I guess, a foot or a few toes in the patriarchy because she was a prosecutor and so on. But the reality is that certain aspects of what she does are matriarchal. And and I thought I don't know the guy's initials, but Mr. Hughley or Hughley, something like that. He's a black comedian who was on the stage of the Democratic National Convention, and he says, "I don't blame Trump for not wanting to have a debate with Kamala Harris. I've been in a marriage with black women for the last 40 years, and I've never wanted to be." And so, yeah, I'm in a school that's 90% women teachers. All of my co-teachers are women, and so um, it's a very matriarchal place. It's very empathetic, and that's very appropriate for the school where I teach, because it deals with people who have issues, and very reasonable issues, like parents who have died or abandoned or what have you. And so those are very traumatic things, and I'm gradually getting into the swing of how to do these things. Now, I have always been well, let's put it this way. I'm not a picture book Marine. I succeeded as a Marine for 23 years, but I don't think of myself as the hard charging, nail chewing, um, go out there and hell, death, and destruction type of Marine. I never was that. And so, anyway.
Well, and I think that's
I
an
always thought you were, oh, sorry. I always thought you were from the Navy, Skip. You
No,
were a Marine?
well, yeah, Marines are part of the Navy. Marines are part of the Department of the Navy. We are
Right.
we, we are the seagoing bellhops. That's
seagoing bell.
that's a way that we're is a pejorative, but that is directed at us. But no, we are a force that when you absolutely positively need to have something destroyed by tomorrow, you call the Marines. Okay. because
Ay, ay, ay.
because when we go into battle, into combat, we take everything we need with us. We have it with us. We're not light infantry like the
Right.
airborne. The airborne division jumps into a place, and they can only support those troops on the ground for 2 days, and then they're out of luck if they don't have resupply. But when the Marines go in, we go in with tanks, with artillery, with our own F-18s, with our own helicopters. The Marine Corps is the 10th largest air force in the world.
And there's the bellhop. You travel with trunks and luggage.
Right. And so Marine, I mean, there's a whole part of the Navy that is dedicated to delivering the Marine Corps to where it needs to be. And so,
Right.
for example, the LPH ships, which look like a aircraft carrier, but they're actually a helicopter carrier. But that one ship carries an entire battalion of Marines. That's 800 men with tanks, with artillery, and with helicopters. It doesn't carry F-18s. Those are provided by another part of the Navy, the deep sea Navy. But the so-called Gator Navy, its only role in life is to deliver the Marine Corps to the shore. So when we go to fight, we take everything we need with us, and we're ready to go right away. These days. That's our mission. And let's see, what's the saying? The Marine Corps is
Don't tread on me.
Yeah, well, the Marine Corps is 248 years of blood, guts, hell, death, and destruction, the finest fighting force the world has ever known. Gung ho, gung ho, gung ho. Now, if you're in a war, a big war like the war in Ukraine, then you want the Army, because the Marine Corps only has 3 divisions and 3 air wings. And so if you need a force to handle a major war, then you need the Army and the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. You don't need the Marines. The Marines have a different mission. And so anyway, so let's get through the rest of this segment at
Sorry.
least. But anyway, as you can tell, I'm still, even though I retired 33 years ago, I'm still quite proud of my Marine Corps service. And if I were ever in a trench trying to fight for my life, I would always want Marines next to me. no doubt about it. And for those of you who may be listening, if you don't understand this, you can look on YouTube and find the video entitled "The Marines," which is by a public TV station up in Buffalo, New York. But they did a terrific 1 hour, 20-minute video about the Marines, and it really covers it soup to nuts. So anyway, all right.
I think it would be absolutely amazing to have a female president, but not that many people are fond of her, not even many Democrats are, but eventually it might happen.
Well, I
You know,
think
that's a
she's tough enough to do it, and it will be different from a patriarchal president, but it will be, I think it'll be good for the country. You know,
and I would agree, Amela, but I also am politically really sick and tired of, oh, we need this color or this gender or this or that. I want a president.
yep.
And so to me, my modicum of discernment with any political figure is, are they a leader? I don't care, male, female, black, white, brown, orange, purple, or as you know,
Right.
Gip's CO would say, we're all green. So it's
No,
like,
right.
and I think that's important to get past the, oh, I need to hire a woman so that I get grants, and well, that's just
Yeah,
opportunistic.
there are so many countries right now, especially in countries like Italy, Germany, and Mexico that have anti-democratic far-right governments that don't believe in this and that and the latter. And the people who benefit from that are people who can afford to pay $40 for a document saying that, in fact, I did pay for my water bill.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the type of stuff that goes on in a authoritarian country. There's people have their hands out for everything.
Well,
Everyone
and I
wants
think
to be persuasive when it comes to power and authority
Right.
and control.
Yeah.
well, and I
And
think Gip's verb extrapolate. That's I've sat back to the capital O observer. People are like, who are you voting for? Well, I'm not going to discuss anything publicly. I'm observing because right now the appearance versus reality. What's AI? If I see something with someone who I think I support, and then I see something that, wow, that could change my thinking, and then I notice something like, oh, there aren't shadows on the plane, there aren't reflections. That's computer generated. It's fake. So
mhm,
trying to see past the kabuki theater that's right in front of us, changing the
right.
scene, all the time. I think even the act of seeing is a defiant act these days, and trying to see what factually occurred, and instead of, don't tell me what you think I want to hear, and
Hmm.
Yeah.
and then go print more money. There's a whole lot of a two-way street where mudslinging now has become artful, and it's really interesting because it's so Orwellian. I mean, it's 2024, but it feels like 1984.
Mhm,
So I'll
right.
stop.
Sure it does. Okay.
There
All
were
right.
there were these, I'm so sorry. There were these two churches in my neighborhood. And one of the churches, they kept saying that they couldn't fix up the church, like the leak on the roof and all that. They couldn't fix, and I think this sort of goes with Elijah
Hmm.
because the two differing points of views. So this one church, they said they couldn't make repairs because they didn't have the funds to, and the other church, which already had funds and several sources of income, they had an after school program, they had a full-time school program, they had a summer school program, so they, on top of donations, they had a very healthy source of income, and they were constantly making repairs. And so the other church, what they decided to do was create like a residential facility for people with special needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, before the people could even move in, before they could even cash the check, all of a sudden the church had money and the church made all of these repairs. Now, I am not an accountant and I never had access to their database, but something like that is exactly what's happened in my mom's homeland, where this president, he made all these promises of, oh, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But before that, his opponent, who's also his friend, didn't do anything. So for about 5 years of nothing being done, I have reason to speculate that probably all of the stuff that they said they were going to do now that they've done is from the money that they stole from the past half a decade, and now they have, you know, the ability to wash off the dirty money and,
Yeah.
and say, well, oh, look, all the money that I robbed from you, I ended up making a profit. Now here's your money back. See, I'm a great leader.
Yeah. Well, there's, there's a lot of strange things that go
Yes,
on in the search of power, right?
Consciously for that individual who did that consciously, they can sleep better at night. But for everyone else who had to pay the psychological and all the other prices of the lack of moral.
Hmm. Boy, oh boy. Yes, indeed. Okay, let me get through to the next heading at least. So in Jung's collected works, we hear no more about Salome. She does, however, reappear in memories, dreams, reflections, where she is identified with Eros. In answer to Job, Jung identifies Sophia with Eros. So there is a link between the two figures. Sophia is the Hebrew Rosh, representing God's feminine spirit that accompanies God at the beginning of creation. According to Jung, God has forgotten Sophia and is more in league with Satan. In answer to Job, the tribal Yahweh comes up against a man who stands against him. In the drama between a man and his God, God's status begins to change when God remembers his original alliance with his playmate Sophia. As Eros, she reveals herself to humans as their friendly helper and advocate against Yahweh. By so doing, she transforms the wrathful Yahweh into a kind, just, and amiable God. Sophia and God enter a new Heros Gamos. That's a wedding of the feminine and masculine spirit. A new Heros Gamos. Sophia, in answer to Job, represents a further redemption of the Salome in the Red Book. She becomes an integral part of a new God image. In the stretch between Salome and Sophia, Jung seems to be in the process of overcoming his rejection by Freud and laying the foundation of an attitude to God that is less patriarchal, less rigid, more loving, more mysterious. While on stage, I could fully sympathize with Jung's confusion when Salome announces that she is his sister, Maria is their mother, and he is Christ. At first, this sounds mad, but theologically and psychologically, both. At first, this sounds mad, both theologically and psychologically. Christians would interpret this statement as heresy, and psychologists would see it as an example of inflation. But if I was to stay in the role of Elijah, I had to find a way of supporting the mystery, even though it was at variance with my own beliefs. Clearly, the text indicates that this process was not the creation of an ego. Jung on the cross with the head of a lion and serpent coiled around his body resembles more the Mithraic. the Mithraic Ion than an Orthodox Christ. He already wrote about this god in 1912, 1 year before the first entries in the Black Books. In Psychology of the Unconscious, he links the winged Deus Leantocephalus, lion-headed god, an important god of the Mithraic hierarchy in ancient Egypt, with Time, the great transformer. The image represents a union of opposites, evident in the union of the solar lion with the chthonic serpent, an outcome of the Mithraic struggle of the sun with the dragon. For Jung, this implies the division of the god into many parts. The division of the god into many parts ceases, and the divine unity is restored. Or, as he says later in Mysterium Conjunctionis, these concepts naturally imply the renewal of the aging god. Thinking the lion-headed god with the sacrificial Christ suggests the inevitable death and renewal of the soul's imagery. Jung's image of Christ was not immutable or literal. It changes in the course of time and is subject to shifting cultures of human history. For Jung, Christ's sacrifice could not be imitated. It represented a process of submitting to the warring opposites of the soul. Jung entered a liminal space between what is past and what is to come. From this crucified state, the new emerged. Jung had now to think with the heart and love with the head. The lion-headed god on the cross represents a struggle with the instinctual heritage of humankind in order to raise it to a higher level of consciousness. As an age-old syncretic figure, the lion-headed figure found in Germany is dated 40,000 years before the Christian era, and probably is the oldest sculpture of humankind. It represents an attempt to embrace the heritage of pre-Christian religions, thereby reversing a history of their brutal suppression. This strange image suggests a source of unity that could link dissociated components of Jung's soul. Here, one might ask if Jungian psychology is a religion that will eventually replace the old religions. Despite Jung's Gothic language, the answer is no. Jungian psychology is a psychology of religion. Jung does not expect us to worship these images. He uses them to indicate how our images of God change. He does not ask us to believe. He focuses on core aspects of religious experience that are necessary for the health and wholeness of the psyche. As a non-confessional approach to religious experience, Jung's psychology can act as a bridge between the various religious traditions. Theoretically and ontologically, it is important to distinguish Jung's deeper self from a metaphysical God. Jung implies this in a letter to Fritz Bury, quote, "I don't by any means dispute the existence of a metaphysical God. I permit myself, however, to put human statements under the microscope." Okay, that's the end of that section. Any comments there?
Something that's curious to me, going back into the Mithraic piece of the lion-headed character surrounded by the serpent, as in a sense a different natural view of crucifixion. The word leontocephalus, I think, wouldn't be lion-headed, just because like encephalitis is a swelling of the brain. I'm
Mhm.
wondering if the leontocephalus is better translated as the lion brained, meaning your bright Leo inner nature that's surrounded by the depth dwelling serpent. So, in
Mhm.
a sense, the light within the dark. And rather than a lion headed, I think that's obvious, expected. But I think if I see the cephalus part as the brained, lion brained, it's your natural, bright inner animal nature. And I think that to me lends more credence to the Mithraic symbol of the lion headed deity or character surrounded by the thick serpent, where that's nestled in the soul. That spirit, bright spirit, consciousness nestled in the unconscious depths, the midnight ocean of the soul. And that would be the black set of the yin yang with the white in the middle. And then flip it to, do the other,
Yeah.
and the black and the white. So the dark and the light. So I think the leontocephalus piece, to me, for me, it feels better, and maybe I'm invoking a mistranslation, but it seems the expected part of the translation is indicating a superficial symbol that has not yet hatched into the true meaning of the generated meaning being what was within, rather than what it appears to be. So
Yeah.
that's just my 2 cents. I may be completely off base, but I think there's more to leontocephalus than meets the eye.
Assuredly. And I think that what is clear is that Jung came to the conclusion that all human beings have both masculine and feminine features. And um, and that all of us have that, leaving aside what our sexual equipment is. Um, the reality is that all human beings have both a masculine and a feminine side. So there is no question in my mind that if I were in battle, I could do the things that Marines do. Okay, no doubt about it in my mind. And not because I was trained to do it, but because I know that I would and could do it. But at the same time, I know that I have a strong feminine side, and I want to be nurturing to my students, for example, and that's a feminine function. And so, what we've had in the external world for literally hundreds of years is the patriarchal side realizing that it is going to be cut down to size by the feminine and fighting back against it. And the reality
Going
is
back to
we
those
are going to
arguments,
balance. Pardon? What did you
well,
say?
going back to the arguments of, going back to the arguments of the, you said of the DNC of, I've been married to a black woman and I never won an argument. I saw this couple several weeks ago, and he's got this stylishness and she does too, and they're really laughing a lot together. They've been together 44 years. And the interviewer says, well, what's the secret to your healthy marriage? And they look at each other and they both start laughing. He goes, oh, it's so simple. The first night we consummated, and then we realized, let's make a rule. I, as the man, am going to make all of the big decisions, and you, as a woman, will make the small and medium decisions. And they agreed. And then they both looked at each other and they start bust out laughing again. And the interviewer says, what's so funny? And he looks at her. He said, if I remember correctly, there hasn't been a single big decision in our whole marriage. Like he hasn't made any. So, smart man kind of thing, where talk about inclusion. And I think but they were both so giggly, and in a sense, we're making fun of that dynamic
Mhm.
instead of fighting the dynamic. And I think that's important. I mean, I think just that's that piece of the puzzle. Instead of cut down to size, make shame walk the plank and temper with both.
Yeah. Right.
I find it interesting that there's this discussion of the lion head, and when I think of the lion head, I think of the goddess Bastet, who is actually a cat and not a lion, and she's seen as the seductress and the protector and all these other characteristics. But then when we look at the lion is only the animus and not the anima, because a lioness cannot be the same as a lion. But when we think about a Leo is one and the same. And when it comes to the personality of the male lion can be seen as the predator or as the mediator between the lionesses, or the predator, like in David and Goliath, when he protects his flock from the lion, who does what a lion does and gets into his predator cape. I and then
Well,
there's also yeah, and then I also have this while you were speaking, I also had this thought of the destruction of ancient Alexandria and all these ancient civilizations, and also the destruction of Bastet's temple, which was one of the most celebrated temples, where they had almost 1 million attendees at their festival of Bastet, which Jesus also went to this festival.
Mhm.
And it's so fascinating to me how people can, and it's also in terms of everything that happens in society, whether it's religion or politics or inflation, whatever it is, people are just waiting for that one urge to just go totally bananas and
Right.
just let it
Which
all
is
unleash.
which is what Jung observed on August 1st, 1914, when he was rushing back to Germany, or to Switzerland via Germany, and he starts coming across various towns and villages, and they have a festival going on. They're dancing in the streets about the beginning of World War One, and
Mhm.
and uh, anyway,
Well, I
it,
think to add to the lion, I mean, if you're going to pick a lion to fight, pick the male. Because if
mhm,
you've ever watched lions, then the female, the lionesses are, you want to talk about power. You want to talk about force. And especially during the rut or mating season, there's a whole different thing going on with, who's wielding the power. And you look at the males almost as being this subservient. The lionesses are like these Amazonian women, and it's like, oh, look at nature's way. And so I think, it's again appearance versus reality. We may say, oh, lion, king of the jungle. And I'm like, they don't live in the jungle. They live in the desert. And
yeah,
so, you get a lot of appearance versus reality with king of the jungle. I mean, that's a tiger, not a lion. And the lioness is more like tiger. So anyway.
yeah. Okay, so we move along, and next week we'll work on Izdubar a bit. Um, Izdubar is one of my favorite passages in the Red Book, and we've been covering it the last few weeks in the advanced reading group. We have one more session at least to go, and let me just see if I can tell you what page in the um, Red Book. Um, okay, it would be in the reader's edition of the Red Book, page 277. That's where the story of Izdubar appears. And it's a very interesting story. It's about what Jung did to revivify the Eastern god, Izdubar, who is the same we established through footnotes as Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh being the first story. And let's see. Let's see. Okay. Well, there's some discussion going on the YouTube chat. I'm just going to leave that for now, and we'll see you next week, and we'll talk about Izdubar. And if you get a look at the reader's edition, the red book, go to page 277 and read from there about Izdubar and what Jung did with Izdubar to revivify him. Okay. And it goes to my terms of when, Nietzsche said God is dead and we have killed him, and Jung came along in the next generation and found the living God, where the living God lives, and how the living God goes about to do the work of the Godhead. That's what Jung did.
Yeah, and then Nietzsche is basically saying the God that we know has gone, and now the resurrection will come forward. I mean, so there's again symbols of what's generative between Nietzsche and then to Jung.
Right. Okay. Peace, everyone. Have a good day. Have a nice holidays. Be careful on the roads. People are crazy right now. In the Labor Day weekend, they count deaths.